Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Friday webinar. And please welcome our guest today, Elise Loehnen. So, Elise, it's great to see you and be with you here on the webinar. So we're going to begin, as we always do, with a couple of minutes of slow, deep, soft belly breathing so that we can relax and bring ourselves into this place and this moment. So sit with me, please, everyone. And just, Elise, you sit with me as well. And we'll breathe slowly and deeply. In through the nose, out through the mouth, with our bellies soft and relaxed. And remember, everyone, this is a concentrative meditation. We're concentrating on our breath coming in through our nose and out through our mouth. On the relaxation and softening of our bellies as we exhale. And on the word soft as we breathe in and belly as we breathe out. If thoughts come, notice them, let them come, let them go. Gently bring your mind back to soft belly. Couple more deep breaths, relaxing with each exhalation. Now we can open our eyes, let ourselves come back into the room where we're sitting. And letting go of the shoulders, right? Welcome again, Elise. Our viewers, many of our viewers, many of you may know Elise as the Chief Content Officer for Goop, and she'll tell us more about what that has been like. She was that for a number of years, and the co-author of 11 books, including, as I learned for the first time not long ago, 5 New York Times bestsellers. And she's also, and one of the reasons I wanted to have her on the webinar with me is because Elise is flat out, hands down, one of the best interviewers on the planet.
Oh, thank you.
It's true. Because you're interested in the people whom you interview. You do your homework. for me and for other people as well, I've seen you do other interviews. You want to learn what we have to offer, and you consider it. You consider it not just intellectually or cognitively, but if there are pieces of advice or experiences, you're willing to jump in, to have the experience for yourself, and you're also willing to share what's going on with you as you as you meet us, your interviewees, what we have to offer in books or wherever we offer it, what it has to offer you and what it means to you. So you're a kind of a wonderful representative of every woman and indeed everyone. I mean, you're really, so you're a teacher, and the way you talk, the way you listen, and the way you talk and the way you share what you're learning is profoundly instructive. So I'm happy to have you on and happy to interview you and return a little of the favor. So.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you. You are one of my favorite conversation partners, as you know, and I love your book. I cannot recommend it to enough people, and thank you for your work over a lot. I mean, you have done a lot, so I'm sure you recognize that. But thank you for your service.
Thank you for saying it. And one of the things about you is you're not shy about saying things that you feel, even if they're complimentary. A lot of people, as I'm sure you know, are very anxious about saying, should I say this? Shouldn't I say it? Is it okay? And you seem to have a capacity to speak very directly and very much from your heart as well as from your head.
Well, thanks. It's interesting. I think about that all the time, both how to identify my feelings, including the unsavory ones that I want to higher mind away, and then try to figure out what's barring me from expression or what should be expressed and what shouldn't, which is always also the dance, I think, that we engage in as humans.
Well, you've had a lot of contact with really by now millions of people through the books, through your interviews, through all the work that you did over the years with Goop. Tell us a little bit about who you are. Who is Elise Loehnen, and how did you become this person, this wonderful person who you are
now? Where do I start? So I grew up in Montana, which is, as you probably know, not a very densely populated state. And I spent a lot of time as a child alone, playing in the woods and nature. And what I now, of course, recognize is just an incredible way to grow up. Now that I live in Los Angeles and I'm trying to raise two boys here in sort of nature deficit, I will say. But yeah, I grew up in this small liberal town in Montana. And my dad's a doctor, my mom's a nurse. They're both transplants there. And I think, like everyone else, every other child of the 70s, I'm a product of benign neglect. And one thing I really credit my parents for, I had so much freedom, like it was my mom found the idea of boredom very offensive. And she would try to school that out of us. So the minute we were sort of like, I'm bored, Mom, her response was always like, I'm not here to entertain you, entertain yourself, go read a book. So I grew up besides the woods, and we had horses, and I grew up reading with my brother. And that was one of my primary ways of contacting the world, or really understanding the world outside of my very wonderful but small childhood. And as it happens with kids who grew up in small towns, I was desperate to live in a big city. I went to boarding school, and then I went to Yale, and then I moved to New York and worked in magazines. And not that there was any direction to my life. I just knew I wanted to work in words and story in some way. And then ultimately I married my husband. And we moved to Los Angeles almost immediately. And I started working for a big internet company, which was a really interesting and necessary chapter in my career, because growing up in magazines, you're very used to one-sided conversations where you publish something and you're like, like there were no, people would write actual letters and mail them to the magazine, but there was no engagement. There was no digital. There was no conversation. You never had to worry about whether your story was well received or not, or whether it inspired or provoked anything in anyone else. And so I knew I needed to learn about the internet. This is 10 years ago. It's amazing how much technology has changed even in 10 years, right? And then after that, I met Gwyneth, and when she moved from London to Los Angeles, and I joined her at Goop, where I was for about 7 years. And we did a lot of really fun stuff. I ran the content team. So the newsletter, we did a book imprint, we did a Netflix show, I co-hosted the podcast, which obviously you've been a guest on, maybe more than anyone else. But yeah, I think that when I think about who I am and why I am how I am, and it's this like continual act of educating myself and reading and trying to stay engaged and really being curious and wanting to understand. And yes, I got a very fancy, pedigreed, expensive education, but that also, you kind of don't learn that much. One of my coworkers always says, like, Yale is going to sue me for defamation, but the most valuable education that I've had has been around my education, if that makes sense, and sort of pursuing my own interests and a desire to really understand people and to understand what we're going through and to understand some of these bigger contexts emotionally, spiritually, historically. I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, I was thinking as you were speaking that the forces that were so important to you as a young person, which included nature and reading, and are so foreign to so many kids and families. And your parents, you describe it as benign neglect, but it was also giving you tremendous freedom.
Yes.
And definitely. I'm wondering, I'm going to jump ahead because I'm thinking about what you have learned. How can you share, or can you share some of what you've learned about how to keep kids in touch with those realms that were so important in a time when we are overwhelmed with information, when we're constantly focused on screens, and now with the pandemic that there's so much restriction of movement. So do you want to talk a little bit about those challenges and how you think both parents and kids can wrestle with those in an effective way?
Yeah, it's so hard. And I wish I had easy answers. And I also wish that although I don't even know if this exists, I think this is part of our perpetuating some of the problems socially. Like, I wish I had sort of the energy or the willpower to force my own children to do the things that I think are enriching. Because it's hard, I didn't have an iPad, obviously. My kids do, and it's been a necessity for COVID and this whole year. I mean, they're on Max. My oldest is obviously on Zoom all day in school. And so it's really hard to not feel a tremendous amount of anxiety between sort of the difference between their experience of childhood and my own. And, we go back to Montana and I fantasize about moving there in part because we can let them go. And they go and they, it's like the raised by wolves. It's real. And it's hard to do that in any urban area because not only is there not that much green space, but people think you're judged, sometimes even thrown in jail, right? For, it's like the case in Philadelphia. I think it was Philadelphia where 2 kids were walking each other to school and someone called Child Protective Services on them, even though like that's not crazy. But I think socially we've come to a place where we're so overprotective. We're not letting our kids develop their prefrontal cortex. We're not letting them make mistakes to feel a little bit of danger. And So I don't know, we try to send our kids outside in our yard, which is not huge, just to play and dig and explore, without looking over them, so they feel a little bit of sense of freedom. But, you know, I remember going to a mommy and me class, and this incredible leader, and she said, just want you guys to think about your own childhoods and think about the memories that are imprinted as some of the most incredible times of your life. Most likely, you're running free, maybe with other kids, maybe by yourself outside, and your parents were in sight. So remember that as you're raising your kids, like how do you let them live apart from you? It's obviously very, very hard in this particular moment in time.
So how have you been doing it, and how have you been dealing with the difficulties? Because I think, you really are somebody who thinks a lot, understands, and you do have the history of your own freedom and possibility and exploration.
Yeah. So we have a park near our house, and the kids are there with another group of kids. They've been sort of quarantine potting, although now my kids have had COVID. So I guess that gives them a little bit of extra immunity. They were asymptomatic, but they go every day. As soon as Max is done with school, they're there. Vicky takes them, and they're there for 4 or 5 hours. And there's a mountain. It's nothing like what I grew up with, where I literally had my own mountain with deer beds, but there are little trails and mountains, and it's confined relatively, but like they go, and everyone sort of stays in the park area, and then they go out and explore and find things and bring them back. And that's sort of been the closest way to approximate it, other than taking them to Montana and literally letting them run wild.
I think both of those are so important, is do regularly, and you do it every day. I know my goddaughter Rosemary, who people saw on the webinar a couple of weeks ago, she's doing that too. She's actually doing much more outdoor activity with her kids than she ever did before, and kids are responding.
Yeah. Well, I think that what we're experiencing in COVID, obviously, is not only our disconnection from nature, but then also like the fact that we exist within it. And when you think about COVID as a metaphor, this little virus that clearly wants this, is trying to sustain itself. It's not trying to kill itself. But the way that we, in so many ways, are that to this planet. And we're trying, we're just out. We've lost the plot a little bit in terms of being humans, being animals, being part of a wider situation. And I think so many of us feel really called to return, or to get back into some sort of cycle with nature, and to start to have a little bit more reciprocity in terms of how we're engaging with it, and thinking about the energy of the people that we're around, the energy of the products that we're bringing into our homes, the energy of where we're shopping, where we're spending our money. I think this whole experience in our sacred timeout has been an exercise in trying to be more conscious, sort of forced, but happening.
I'm sure that you do, is that you're calling your kids' attention to what's there. And I think, one of the difficulties, one of the things that you grow up doing and continue to do, is you're an observer. You see what's going on, you pay attention, which is sort of a fundamentally meditative state of mind, just being present with whatever's there. And it's crucial to teach kids the same thing. Yeah. Just pointing out, the squirrel, or whatever it is, or the plant, because otherwise they may not see.
Yeah. And also, I think that and this is also, I think, one of the big lessons of parenthood, right? Is that everything's a phase, and that kids in many ways raise themselves, right? It's just sort of a natural progression of who we are as humans, in the same way they're raised by nature. And I think right now we've become so disconnected that we think everything is sort of cause and effect. Like, if we don't do this for our kid, they're not going to become a better reader. If we don't do this, they're not going to learn. And so it's been really interesting to watch my 7-year-old in particular. I'm like, I'm not doing anything. There's no intervention. Like, this is him growing up and engaging with the world and learning. And I'm giving myself too much power in a way, too much responsibility for something that's his own natural evolution.
I want to come back a little while later to be talking about more about this period of time and how we can all move forward. But I want to go back a little bit. One of the things in looking at your bio that I observed that I knew you'd done writing with other people before, 11 books, 5 New York Times bestsellers, but your name was not out there. So what was it like being the sort of person behind the scenes? What has that been like? And what is it like now coming out and finding your own voice? And I just want to add that finding one's own voice as we work, whether it's me, sharing copies of Transforming Trauma, my book, with people, or as we work in our training programs, one of the things that people say consistently is I began to find my own voice. Sometimes it's again, and sometimes it's for the first time. So can you talk a little bit about your evolution? I think that could be very helpful for people who are watching us, how you more and more have found your own voice.
Yeah. So I'm, as you mentioned, I'm writing a book right now that's actually under my own name, which is hilarious because I obviously have a lot of experience publishing books and ghostwriting for other people, which I've always justified doing because it's a fascinating experience to sort of tap into someone's world, into their voice, to address their audience, which can often be completely different or distinct from any audience that I've ever known. And so I think there's a lot of, it's really interesting, and there can be a lot of power in that co-creation. And I also find it very easy because I think I'm naturally a little bit of a channel. And when my ego is really not involved and I'm working with someone else's life story or the points that they're trying to express, I can really vacate. Like I can really just let it come through in a way that's very easy, it's almost a meditation, and it's very easy for me to do. But I grew up really in many ways throughout my career hiding behind, even though I was a writer, I worked at magazines that really didn't have bylines. I have hidden behind people, celebrities, brands for the first 20 years of my career. And in a way it was like, oh, this is more interesting. These people have more power. They have a bigger audience. They have a bigger platform. So this is a better use of my voice or their voice, or where the two meet, than doing anything under my own name, because I really just wanted the information out there, not necessarily the adulation or admiration for having created it. I didn't care about that. But I started to realize that it was becoming that I was not disempowering myself, but that I needed to come out of hiding, not so much because I need to be known or famous. Like, I don't care at all about that. I don't want that at all. But that I am in many ways very relatable. I'm sort of I am like the Rorschach test of like, oh, she's like me. Even though I'm kind of odd, but a lot of people, and I think it is because I'm willing to share a lot of my feelings, but a lot of people relate to me. And so if that can be a starting point, particularly at this time in history and culture when white women in particular seem to be so split, and so powerful and yet disempowered, and so kind of misunderstood. I don't know if misunderstood is the right word, maligned, rightly and wrongly. I do feel like I have a responsibility to start to show up in that way and let myself be seen, I guess. But it's hard. There's part of it that feels embarrassing and shame. I'm like, don't look at me, don't look at me. And it's old trauma stuff, I think, too. But it's felt important to me to not betray myself by hiding. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Tell us a little bit about working at Goop and what you were chief content officer. What does that mean? What was it like? What did you do? What was it like working with Gwyneth Paltrow? And what were you trying to teach the rest of us, or do with and for the rest of us? And what did you learn for yourself?
Yeah, it was a fascinating job. And I'm really so proud of the work that we did, and the work that the team will continue to do, because as you know, like, I led that team, but I'm not responsible for a vast amount of some of the best work that came out of the company, and the people there are incredible. So when I joined, it was sort of it was a weekly newsletter, spread out over a handful of different, a lot of different categories. It was just Gwyneth writing from her kitchen table, but there was a huge amount of attachment and interest in the brand. And so there was definitely an opportunity. I will say, though, it wasn't, neither of us really approached it as like, oh, there's this opportunity, there's this, let's go get this market share. It was more sort of, wow, if this is resonant for us and resonant for women we know, and then they're like, it's sort of the ripple effect of that, then there's something here. And I really give Gwyneth credit for being willing to be the face of something that was pushing conversations, breaking taboos, pushing buttons, particularly in the world of women's health and women's sexuality, desire, trauma, all the things that I think we all feel and haven't had either the words necessarily to express or the context to understand those feelings, but also haven't had, I don't want to say permission, because that makes Goop sound, we weren't giving anyone permission, but I think watching other women and watching people engage in that process does inherently make it feel a little bit more safe, a little bit more normal to have some of those conversations and start to open the hood a little bit on what we've been feeling, what we've suppressed, what we've repressed, what we're scared to talk about. And so it was an amazing vehicle to do that. And it's an incredible brand, because obviously GP is one of the most recognized women in the world, and people really wanted to work with her and understand her and collaborate. And so we had opportunities to do really incredible things, like our Netflix show, the Goop Lab, and all of those really rare opportunities to make content in different formats.
Can you give us an example of one of those buttons that you pushed, the controversial subject, what you did and what happened, and how it contributed perhaps to a larger discussion and a greater understanding?
Yeah. I mean, so we were talking about the Netflix, the psychedelics episode. And I think for a lot of people, psychedelics, despite their actually incredibly long and incredible history and healing, we're still sort of, when we started talking about them, they were still sort of the provenance of like hippies and subcultures, and, you know, not necessarily something that, you know, maybe women were doing, probably not. Like a lot of these things, I think, were intimidating or scary, or it's like, isn't that illegal, et cetera. So we started talking a lot about psychedelics and their power to really help people move faster through essentially through therapy, right? To access a lot of these repressed emotions, experiences, and memories, sometimes to go straight to the light or to source, or to establish one of those sort of a direct relationship with some sort of universe. And so we started talking about it a lot, because it seems like maybe one of the more promising tools besides the work that you do and that other people do. So that's one example, I think, where we've been strident. Now it's becoming very mainstream, which is amazing, and hopefully will be through the FDA quickly. Trying to think of another. I mean, certainly around women's sexuality and desire, we've got a lot of pushback for, we would do sort of sex issues different than sort of the way that sex has been covered historically in magazines like Cosmo and other women's mag titles, where it's like,
how would you say it's different, Elise, the way you've approached sex and sexuality?
Because it's very focused on the way that women receive and perceive pleasure and their experience of desire, rather than being focused on tips or tools or ways to expand pleasure for your partner. We've never done a story like that. We never did a story like that. We certainly didn't do anything to suggest that women are unclean or need to be groomed, or like, we just sort of avoided that that's kind of been very dominant in women's magazines, is like waxing and grooming and all of the stuff that's irrelevant to pleasure and really just about optics. So I don't want to say that like what we did was inherently more empowering, but it was really more about the feelings of it and like the increasing intimacy, increasing connection to our body, feeling like we have our Shakti, our life force moving, than it was about sort of the accoutrements of sex.
As you're speaking, I can feel both the good common sense, and also the wisdom and the kindness of the approach. Mm-hmm. The way you speak about it, your tone of voice, as well as what you say. I'm wondering what kind of pushback you've gotten on sexuality or psychedelics, where you're trying to, create a more sort of whole person experience.
Yeah. The pushback, I think, typically has been around less about sort of the specifics and more about wanting to see the brand in a specific way as pushing wellness as something that needs to be bought, or that's not, or that's attainable, or that's unattainable, or sort of wrapped in fanciness, which is interesting because people who actually experience the brand, particularly the content, have almost an opposite experience. But it's more, the pushback for us has been more about the wrappings of it, and then this idea of like, how dare you, what sort of expert are you, what gives you the right to not be an actress only.
How do you deal with that? How dare you, what sort of expert are you?
You can't, there's just no point in engaging or worrying or arguing about it. That's where I think we spend so much energy, particularly women. It's, we already judge ourselves so excessively and extremely, and we judge each other. So if you then take on the external judgment as well from people who don't even know you, it's incapacitating, it's handicapping. And I think that's the other lesson I learned at Goop, which I thought was so profound and life-changing, was this idea of when people criticize you, and I mean, most women, we cave, right? We're so attached to this idea that society has programmed into us that we need to be good, whatever that means. We need to be impeccable. We need to be perfect. That when someone criticizes us or accuses us of not being good or perfect, we crumble, right? It's just like it's devastating. And I really learned how to be stronger and to sort of understand if something hurts, then maybe it's because it's something that I hold against myself. And if it's from someone who knows me and loves me, then maybe I need to listen. But if it's not, like, I need to let it go. There's nothing to see there.
So how do you get into that state? We're looking at you as, women are looking at you and saying, well, she's kind of like me. So what do you want? Could you share about how you move from that state of self-consciousness and kind of hiding somewhat in a state where you're willing to be as publicly vulnerable as you are, and where you do get attacked? How have you done that, and how are you dealing with it when it comes up?
Fortunately, I've been pretty safe personally. But work that I've done has been criticized, obviously. So first, I think it's just stopping for a second to understand what it is that I feel. And one of the things that I, work on, and I work on this stuff all the time, as you know, in my own therapy, sort of as I move throughout the day. When someone criticizes me, I get scared. It scares the shit out of me, right? I panic, and I have that immediate shutdown response of just like, I'm not going to survive, I'm terrible, whatever it may be. And I just stop and pause and let it come up and try and process. I can feel it coming up now, and just try and sit with it and process it and let it happen rather than stuffing it down. And it's like, that's the process over and over again. It's like, and I'm not perfect at it. And as you know, there's no end, right? It's not like you finish weeding the garden and you're like, oh, I got rid of all those pesky emotions and now they're all gone and there are no more roots in there and there's no way that anything's going to shoot up and take me down. So it's just this constant tending to what I'm feeling, because I think that for women in particular, we haven't been trained to do that. We're not good at it. We don't have a lot of emotional granularity or understanding. So we feel it's like, oh, I'm pissed or I'm irritated or I'm frustrated. And it's like, we just sort of leave it there instead of trying to understand what's underneath it, which might be grief. It might be fear. It might be shame, might be a sort of a defensive reaction to those moments when people are like, you're bad or you're not perfect. So I really just feel like it requires a constant presence and the willingness to acknowledge that, yes, and you know this better than I do, you can do huge chunks of work. Like, we can heal trauma, big T, little t trauma to some extent, but it's still, you're not done. There's no like finish line of you're perfectly evolved, conscious human, and you're never gonna feel bad again. That's just not what life's about.
So, tell me what are you laughing at now? Is you're laughing?
Oh, I'm just laughing at just this idea, the fallacy that we have. We're such a finish line society. That's how we are. We're like, I'll get married and then I'm good. Like, I'll have the wedding and then I'm done. Or I'll graduate from college and then I'm done. Or I'll become rich and famous and then I'm done. And as one of my favorite therapists says, like, there is no exoneration from pain and hard work. And like, that's life. And that's what we signed up for. If you subscribe to the same spiritual beliefs that I did, which is like, we have soul contracts and this is Earth School. And like, we chose to be here. We even chose to be here right now during this really crazy moment in history.
Yeah, well, let's talk about this moment in history. You and I were talking not so long ago about the work that I'm hoping to do is to catalyze a kind of movement for national healing and teaching people the kinds of self-care techniques that I teach in Transforming Trauma that we've been talking about in the webinars. And you're very enthusiastic, and you understand that this is a movement that has to be a popular kind of democratic movement, that it's not top down about psychiatrists or psychologists saying this is what you have to do. It's more about giving people skills that they need and providing support. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your vision of what kind of healing we need now and how we can move ahead with that. And how you and I can work together and so many other people can work with us.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And it's interesting because I think that's one of the things that freaks people out a little bit about Goop, which is that it's really focused on empowering people to ask questions, be their own advocates, take responsibility and autonomy, be autonomous over their own health, and sort of take responsibility with the tips, advice, expertise, tools of all the incredible healers that are in our midst. But like, you're one person. my therapist, who I love and adore, he's one person. Like, this is, and he can't do the work for me, and you can't do the work for me, but we can support each other while we do the work collectively, and we can sort of hold the light for each other and show each other the path and model what it looks like, right? Which is not necessarily always extreme catharsis and transformation where you're like, oh my God, again, like, done. Like, I'm past that. That's kind of a myth, but where we can make really, really huge strides to integrate some of these things that were hard, to see the value in the lessons that we learned, which can be really, really hard, particularly when we're stuck sort of in a victim blame dynamic. But it's essential, because therapy, access to healers, it's not accessible for most people. Financially, there aren't enough people. You know, when we talk about psychedelics, for example, one of the big things that keeps Rick Doblin, the head of MAPS, awake at night is like, we don't have enough therapists. Like, how can we scale this as rapidly as we need to in order to hold space for enough people? How can we bring everyday people in who have gone through the process? How can they then hold space for other people? We need a rapid democratization of healing, because, as you know, traumatized people traumatize. And we love to be binary. We love to say this person's good, this person's evil, but that's not true. You know, that's not, we're all variations of the same theme. Some of us are more in shadow. Some of us have bigger trauma pies, have more burdens, have more things that we need to work through in this life. But we're certainly all redeemable, and we're all capable of feeling good in our bodies and happy and or having moments of joy. I don't even like the word happy. I don't even understand what happiness is, but joy, I think we can all relate to moments of joy. But yeah, I desperately believe that we need that. We need this moment of acknowledging what we're feeling, allowing it to happen, giving everyone permission, because I think that's the other danger of some of the conversations that we're having right now, which is this, like, who deserves to feel bad. And, you know, I understand why privilege is a really important part of conversations right now, but we're so busy explaining all of our privileges that we're finding all the reasons that, like, we don't deserve to feel bad or to heal too, if that makes sense. Like, the comparative suffering ranking that we're doing as a society is also not that effective. So I think everyone needs to come to the table. Everyone's got their stuff. So yeah, I can't wait to see the transformation on everyone's bedside table and everyone doing the work and breathing together.
So how are we going to work together? How are you going to work? What are some of your thoughts? Because you've had so much experience in bringing new and challenging, you know, healing and opening heart and mind opening ideas and experiences to people. So what are some of your thoughts about how to make this happen on a large scale? And then we can talk about how individuals can make it happen, or go from individuals to a large scale. Either way.
I think it requires a lot of ambassadors and people being willing to be vulnerable and open about where they struggle and fall. Again, I think it goes back to allowing of our full humanity and the humanity of each other, right? At this moment, when I was just listening to Brene Brown's podcast, where she was talking about our tendency to dehumanize and morally exclude people who we don't believe in. And like that, I mean, I get it. Like, we're all there right now in sort of mouths open state. But I think it requires a lot of different people, different ages, abilities, genders, races, standing up and sort of modeling what it looks like to sort of engage with this discourse. And I think it requires everyone really being willing to look at their own lives, even if they want to insist that that there's nothing to see here. I think we all deserve healing. And like, and again, you can call me woo-woo spiritual, but like, we didn't come here to live perfect lives. We didn't come here to have, I think you've said this to me, you're like, don't worry, like your kids will be plenty traumatized by life. I can't remember the context, but I was like, oh, what if you do everything so that your kids are protected? And you're like, never going to happen. Your kids will have plenty of work to do, even if you protect them as much as possible. So I think it just requires people wanting to feel better. I think it requires people wanting to feel in their bodies and to have better relationships and to be less affected by the external world, in part because they have more internal control over their feelings, not to suppress them, not control in a negative sense, but just more literacy, really, more emotional literacy.
So what are some of the steps that you've helped people to take, that you've taken for yourself and that we should be taking now?
I think conversation and story, because I think that right now we're also at a point in time where we want to believe that there's big data-driven algorithmic apps that are going to take us through this work and solve these problems for us. And I think that really it's conversation. And as we sort of opened, it's like finding the people who you relate to, who you can hold the light for you as you go through this. And I think it's just ongoing. And we're seeing a lot of this now, which I think is fantastic. And we're seeing a lot of it from men as well. Vulnerability and willing to have hard conversations and engage publicly so that people can see it modeled. And then I think it's like a moment of resonance, right? I think this is true for all of us. Like something happens, something said, you see something and you're like, you feel it, you pings, and there's some inner knowing. And I think that the more that we see this happening culturally, the more opportunities there are for people to be like, aha. And then change happens in an instant. And once you get curious about yourself and other people and you start, it's really hard to stop, which is great. But I think it's just a question of like getting the flywheel open. So I think it's conversation. I think it's, I think a lot of what you do, like the breathing, the somatic experiencing, like for me, has been one of the most powerful, very simple wake-up calls for me. And I got there first through psychedelics. So, but feeling embodied and feeling my body, because I think I'd been disassociated from my body for a lot of my life. And now I just do it by like, why does my hip hurt? And then you start that inner dialogue of like, what are you trying to tell me? And you just let it come up. You let your painful hip talk to you. So I think more tools like that. I think some people are more body centered than others. But I think once you have that aha moment, then the door's open.
As I'm listening to you again, I'm appreciating your use of specific techniques like the soft belly breathing or the dialogues. And what I'm also hearing a number of times is your understanding that life goes on and that it has fluctuations and that it's not like something gets solved all at once and it's all over. And I think you convey that very beautifully with who you are as well as with your words, that you're engaged in life and you're you're sticking with it.
It's a cycle.
We're laughing, but it's not so easy at times. And especially during this time, people are, get so discouraged by the political division, understandably, by all the deaths, by coming a reckoning with our history. But there's a sense that you're conveying of, okay, I'm here, I'm up for it, I will deal with it, I'll do my best. Is that am I picking up accurately on who you are and what you're up to? Sort of like, okay, I accept all this.
Yes. And it is hard, and the hits are going to keep coming. It's like I'm sure you saw this too when people were saying goodbye to 2020. There were a lot of things I really loved about 2020. I'm so grateful in a perverse way for COVID, in the sense of like what it has, by stopping us, what it has accelerated in terms of bad stuff, certainly, but also a lot of, I think, a new level of awareness and consciousness of like, this was not sustainable. We cannot live like this. The earth, planet cannot support this. But yeah, you gotta build, we have to build our durability, you know, and people can call that resilience or whatever they want. But it's like, you just have to keep getting up, and you have to keep getting up every day. And there are a lot of amazing moments in every day. And there's a lot of drudgery and boredom to piss off my mother, but it's worth it. And we're going to get through this.
Great. Yes, we are. And I'm actually, we're going to have to come to a close. I'm looking forward to what we can do together, because I think that part of what you're saying that's so important, you're talking about conversations. You're talking about people coming together and sharing themselves, sharing their ideas, and then moving forward in whatever way makes sense. And so there's a sense that I hear from you of both the individual sort of pilgrim's progress, and at the same time, a sense of wanting to connect much more widely. Perhaps another time we'll talk more about how we convey to an ever wider audience what I know you've been, over the years, you've been trying to convey is this sense of the possibility of learning and growing and understanding one another and coming together. So I'm so glad you're able to be here with me, and I'm looking forward to many happy returns.
Yes.
And
thank you so much.
We're going to be speaking, I'm sure, in many ways, many places over in the months and years ahead. Right now, and Elise, are you up for people being in touch with you? How do they get in touch with you now?
Yeah, so they can email me through my website. I just Elise Loehnen, Loehnen, or I'm on Instagram and I check all my messages. And then I will launch a podcast at some point this year. I need to figure it out, but at some point I'll be back having more of these conversations. You'll have to be on, obviously.
Great. Beautiful. So we'll conclude just with sitting for another minute or so and breathing together. Breathing slowly and deeply, in through the nose, out through the mouth, with our belly soft and relaxed. And I'm noticing as I do this, I'm sort of feeling at the same time relaxed and quiet and sitting here with myself. And at the same time, Elise, in the flow of our conversation and our coming together and the example that you're living of moving through life and sort of accepting what comes up and growing, continually growing. Just a couple more deep breaths. Let's open our eyes and bring our attention back in the room. Okay, thank you again, Elise, for being with me, and thank you, everyone, for being with us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Next week on next Friday's webinar, and Elise, I hope to see you very soon.
Yes, please.